in the Canadian economy.
Position.
Feed Ontario, a coalition of food banks, released staggering numbers yesterday. 800,000 Ontarians went to the food bank 6 million times. This is a 36% increase, the biggest increase ever. If the total number of people who visited a food bank were a town, it would be the fourth biggest town in all of Ontario, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister therefore cancel his plan to quadruple the carbon tax on the farmers who feed us and pass common sense Conservative Bill 234 to carve out the tax for farmers?
Sure. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we know that things are challenging for Canadians right now. That is why we are there for them, building more homes faster, providing dental care for children and seniors, cutting child care fees by 50% across the country. And you know what, Mr. Speaker? The only thing that Conservatives know how to do is cut, cut, cut. They would cut child care, dental care, housing. Mr. Speaker, that's not common sense. That is nonsense.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
That minister and the Prime Minister have imposed brutal cuts on Canadian families who opened their fridges to find nothing there. The report out demonstrates that in all of the last 7 years, Ontario Food Bank has gone up. And last year it went up by record amounts. 800,000 people went 6 million times to the food bank in this province. There's a bill before the Senate to take the carbon tax off the farmers who feed us rather than quadrupling it as the Prime Minister has said he will do. Will the Prime Minister stop interfering with the independence of the Senate and let the bill pass so that we can bring home affordable food?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, the Leader of the Conservatives is demonstrating this week that he just can't tell the truth to Canadians. So whether it's the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement, where there is no price on pollution, he can't tell the truth to Canadians what he is doing. Whether it is with regard to why he jumped to the conclusion that it was a terrorist attack, he can't tell the truth to Canadians. Whether it's with regards to misogynistic hashtags on YouTube, he can't tell the truth to Canadians. Mr. Speaker, we need to understand why he doesn't trust Canadians with...
May I remind all members not to approach the limit of what would be considered parliamentary and to stay far away from that so that it is not impugned that a member is deliberately not telling the truth. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The truth is the Prime Minister wants to quadruple the carbon tax, including on our farmers. I have a farmer in my riding who's spending $10,000 a month on carbon taxes alone. All of that is passed on to the consumer. The consequences have been a record number of Canadians relying on food banks. 7 million Canadians are going hungry. 1 in 5 are skipping meals regularly because they can't afford the price of food. Yeah. Will the Prime Minister get out of the way, stop interfering with the Senate, and let them pass common sense Conservative Bill C-234 to take the tax off the farmers who feed us?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just because the Leader of the Conservatives says something does not make it true, as we saw in several times last week, whether it was with regards to how they voted on the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement, perhaps why he blamed others for his mistakes when it came to how he jumped to a conclusion for a terrorist attack. And now what he's talking about with C-234, he knows that is patently false. And when it comes to food prices, that's because of the war in Ukraine and because of inflation. But, Mr. Speaker, he cannot direct the Senate either, and unfortunately his members are doing things that are threatening the democratic principles and rights of independent senators. That is shameful, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable member from Foothills.
Last year, almost 6 million Ontarians visited a food bank, an increase of more than 40%, the highest single increase ever recorded. Clearly, this Prime Minister's carbon tax plan is not worth the cost. Conservatives have a common sense Bill 234 in the Senate which will reduce costs on farmers and make food more affordable for Canadians. But the Prime Minister is blocking this bill, forcing Canadians to food banks. Will the Liberal Minister of Agriculture do his job? Will he defend Canadian farmers, phone Liberal senators to support Bill C-234 to have this carve out for farmers and make food more affordable for Canadians?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we understand that it is absolutely essential today to be investing in Canadians, to invest to support families and to invest in an economic plan for jobs and growth. That is why we are building housing, because we are focused on supply, supply, supply. That is why we have an economic plan which has made Canada the highest per capita foreign investment destination in the G7. Meanwhile, Mr. Speaker, the only thing that Conservatives know how to do is cut, cut, cut.
The Honourable Member from Foothills.
Well, it's good to see the Agriculture Minister stand up and defend Canadian farmers. But if the Finance Minister's plan for Canadians is to cut meals, cut their heat, well, mission accomplished. Your carbon tax plan is working extremely well. But a common-sense Conservative bill, C-234, will provide a carbon tax carve-out for farmers and make food more affordable for Canadians. But the Prime Minister, as Environment Minister, has promised if this bill passes, he will resign. So is that why the Environment Minister is bullying senators in the Senate to block 234? Because he wants to save his job rather than ensure Canadians can afford to feed themselves?
The Honourable Minister for the Environment. The Honourable Minister from the Environment, starting from the top.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative Party of Canada should be ashamed of asking this question in this House after they directed their MPs to bully their senators to bully senators who disagreed with them. One of them had to apologize for bullying some of his colleagues in the Senate, Mr. Speaker. They should be ashamed of themselves. We're not telling senators how to vote. They're doing it, and they're asking them to bully other senators, Mr. Speaker.
Another question from Lawrence. Come on, Lawrence. Come on, Lawrence, you're next.
The Honourable Member from Dufferin-Caledon.
After 8 years, Canadians know this Liberal Prime Minister isn't worth the cost. Over 800,000 Canadians visited a food bank over 6 million times. 41% for the first time ever. The first time ever they had to do it is after 8 years of a Liberal government. Now, that's not bad enough. If these 800,000 people formed a city, it would be the 4th largest city in Ontario, dependent upon feeding themselves at a food bank. This government could do something. Stop holding up Conservative Bill C-234 to take the carbon tax off farmers. Will they do it?
The Honourable Minister for Families.
Mr. Speaker, I've heard directly from Canadian families who are struggling to buy groceries. And on this side of the House, our government continues to make investments to support families through difficult times. Investments in affordable housing, investments in early learning and childcare, and the Canada Child Benefit. The Leader of the Opposition continues to oppose these supports. His common sense, Mr. Speaker, is nonsense. On this side of the House, we'll continue to do all that we can to support Canadian families.
The honourable member from Dufferin-Caledon.
A Liberal minister who gets almost $300,000 a year, drives around in a limo, says that it's nonsense to talk about the 800,000 Ontarians who went to a food bank for the first time. This kind of conduct from these Liberals is disgusting, and there's an answer, there's a fix. They could tell their senators to stop blocking Bill C-234, which will take the carbon tax off farmers. You know, the people that feed us. But no, they're not doing it because the delicate sensibilities of the Environment Minister, who says, I'll resign if there's any more cuts to the carbon tax. Will they take it off? Will they pass C-234?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, we have trouble putting the actual facts on the table from the leaders of the Conservative Party of Canada. When it comes to working with the Senate is independent. There is only one party that is directing senators, and that is the Conservative Party of Canada. And as a member of Parliament from Ontario, he should recall the common sense revolution that not only cut services to education, to healthcare, to water, that led to deaths in Walkerton, Mr. Speaker. It was an absolute death. It was an absolute disaster. Mr. Speaker, Canadians know that their common sense is absolute nonsense. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
There are many experienced members in this House on both sides who do know that when a colleague has the floor, that colleague should be the only person who should be speaking. I ask you please to keep your comments to yourselves until you have the opportunity to take the floor. The Honourable L'Honorable Député.
The honourable member.